It was a quiet street in Dayton, Ohio. Just another ordinary morning in the suburbs. Birds chirped. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically across neatly trimmed lawns. The neighborhood was still wrapped in the calm of early daylight. But on one front porch, a cardboard box sat waiting, unmarked, mysterious, and inside lay a nightmare. That porch belonged to Linda Reynolds, housewife, mother of two, known by neighbors as polite, soft-spoken, and always on time for her shift at the local grocery store. Nothing about her suggested danger. Nothing about her life hinted at crime. But the box, delivered without warning, would unravel everything people thought they knew about Linda. When she opened it, the world around her stopped. No screams, no collapsing to the ground, just silence, because what Linda saw inside wasn't just horrifying, it was personal. It was her son's. That moment would trigger a chain of events unlike anything the city had ever seen. The truth would spill out like blood from an open wound. Drugs, betrayal, power, and a trail of bodies. And at the center of it all, a mother who crossed every line to survive. Some would call her a monster, others a victim of desperation. But one thing was certain, Dayton would never be the same. This is the story of Linda Reynolds, a housewife with a deadly secret, and a package that brought her empire crashing down. Before the headlines, before the drugs, the lies, and the blood, there was just Linda Reynolds, a woman like any other. She lived in a modest, two-bedroom house on Maple Street. Her days were simple: make breakfast, kiss her husband goodbye, and walk her boys to the school bus. In the evenings, she'd stand at the kitchen sink, washing dishes while humming softly to the tune of the radio. Normal, unremarkable, safe. Her husband, Tom, was her rock. A loyal, hard-working mechanic who put in 12-hour shifts to keep food on the table. Their sons, Mike and Kyle, were bright, respectful kids. They played baseball, did their homework, and never gave their parents trouble. The Reynolds family didn't have much, but they had each other. And to Linda, that was everything. But life has a cruel way of changing without warning. On a cold night in January 2008, that fragile sense of peace shattered forever. Tom didn't come home. There was a knock at the door. 2 police officers. Somber faces. There was an incident, they said. A robbery. A shooting. Tom was gone. But Linda knew better. She remembered overhearing phone calls late at night. Strange names. Whispers about getting clean, and one more deal. Tom had secrets. And now, they had caught up to him. And just like that, Linda was alone. A widow, a single mother of 2, and a storm was coming. After Tom's death, reality hit Linda like a freight train. The bills didn't stop coming. The rent was late. Credit cards were maxed out. She clipped every coupon, took extra shifts at the grocery store, skipped meals so her boys could eat. But no matter how hard she worked, it wasn't enough. Collectors called at all hours. The fridge was nearly empty. Her boys had outgrown their shoes. The fear of losing their home clawed at her every single day. One night, Linda sat alone at the kitchen table. The boys were asleep upstairs. The room was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the soft hum of the fridge. On the table, a mountain of bills, and no answers. Her eyes wandered to the garage door. She remembered something, a loose brick behind Tom's workbench. He used to hide things there. She went outside, pulled back the brick. Inside, a metal tin, small bags. The smell was unmistakable. Marijuana. Tom had been selling on the side. Not a lot, just enough to cover some debts. He never told her. But now, it didn't matter. Desperation had a way of justifying almost anything. Linda didn't think of it as crime. Not at first. It was survival. One sale, then another, just to get by. just until things got better. But things didn't get better, and the line she crossed would soon disappear completely. What started as small deals, tiny transactions with sympathetic neighbors, quickly spiraled into something far bigger. Word got around. Linda's stuff was clean, reliable, quiet. And she, well, no one suspected the grocery store cashier to be the plug. She kept the stash in the garage, hidden behind that same loose brick, kept her operations discreet, avoided risky clients. The money helped. The bills were paid. The boys had warm coats that winter. But secrecy doesn't last forever. Not in a house with two teenage sons. Mike and Kyle weren't stupid. They saw her sneaking out at night, noticed the envelope of cash tucked in her purse. And when they confronted her, she didn't lie. She expected anger, disappointment. But what she got instead was an offer to help. The boys became runners. Quiet, quick, careful. They delivered small packages to people all over town. On foot, by bike, sometimes by bus. Linda laid down strict rules. No talking, no questions, no deals after dark. She told herself this wasn't abuse. It was business. And they were safer doing it under her watch than someone else's. By the end of the year, Linda Reynolds wasn't just scraping by. She was thriving. Money came in steady. The fear of eviction faded. Groceries were fully stocked. For the first time since Tom's death, Linda felt in control. But in the world she had stepped into, control was always an illusion. Linda wasn't interested in staying small forever. She had tasted the power, and it tasted like security, like respect, like fear. Soon, she wasn't just selling to locals. She was buying in bulk, moving weight. She made connections, men who could move product faster, cheaper, cleaner. She studied them, watched how they operated, and within months, Linda carved out her own network. She stopped using the boys for deliveries. Things were getting dangerous. Bigger deals meant bigger risks. Instead, she hired outsiders, young men with nothing to lose and no loyalty but to cash. But what really set her apart was who she knew. A city councilman who loved her product. In exchange for silence, she kept him high and happy. A businessman with multiple construction firms. He laundered her money through fake contracts, ghost payrolls, and inflated invoices. And Officer Daniels, Dayton's good cop, always the first on scene, always helping little old ladies across the street. But behind the badge, he was hooked, and Linda supplied him. She had cops, politicians, and corporate money in her pocket. Her name echoed in the alleys. The Queen of Dayton. She never used the drugs herself. She wasn't in it for the high. She was in it for control, for the feeling of being untouchable. But even queens have enemies, and Linda's reign had not gone unnoticed. Power always attracts enemies, and in Dayton, there was one name that had ruled the drug scene long before Linda ever sold her first gram. The West Side Kings, a violent, territorial gang known for their brutality and their unwillingness to share. They had eyes everywhere, and they were watching Linda. At first, it was subtle. One of her runners got jumped, robbed but not killed. Then her suppliers started getting spooked. Someone was intercepting her shipments. The message was clear. You're playing on our turf. Linda didn't scare easily. She doubled down, paid her people better, armed her dealers, rotated drop points. And she made sure Mike and Kyle stayed out. They begged to help again, but she wouldn't allow it. This wasn't just a side hustle anymore. This was war. By January 2010, the streets of Dayton were simmering. Her name was being whispered in corners, and not with admiration. The Kings had lost money, lost ground, and Linda had become a threat they could no longer ignore. That's when it escalated. Threats turned into warnings. Warnings turned into ultimatums. And Linda? She stood her ground. She had built her empire. She wasn't about to bow down to anyone. But what she didn't know was that the West Side Kings weren't planning to take her down through her business. They were going to go through her heart. March 1st, 2010 started like any other day. Linda made breakfast, checked her books, looked out the window at the stillness of Maple Street. But somewhere across town, her sons, Mike and Kyle, were making a decision that would cost them everything. Despite their mother's warnings, they chose to help with one small delivery. One drop-off, one last errand. They never made it home. 3 cars pulled up alongside them on a quiet road. Doors flung open, masks on, guns out. The boys didn't stand a chance. They were dragged into a van, blindfolded, and driven to a basement where the Kings had been waiting. That evening, Linda's phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, almost polite. He told her what they had, told her what they wanted. "Your boys are alive for now," he said. "Give up your territory, your contacts, everything, or you'll never see them again." Linda tried to negotiate money, protection, even herself. But the voice wasn't interested in bargaining. 48 hours, he said. "You made your choice." 2 days later, a package arrived at her front door. No return address, no markings, just a plain, brown box. Inside were the severed heads of Mike and Kyle, their eyes still open, staring at nothing. There was no scream, no collapse, just silence. And inside the box a note, for words written in red ink. "You made your choice," signed with the symbol of the West Side Kings. In that moment, something inside Linda Reynolds died, and something far darker was born. Grief can break people, but for some, it ignites them. That night, Linda Reynolds didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't call the police. Instead, she made a list. She called in every favor she was owed, gathered the last loyal soldiers who hadn't fled, drug runners, old friends, ex-cons, anyone still willing to bleed for her. And then she struck. In one single night, 4 of the West Side Kings' primary drug locations went up in flames. Each one carefully chosen, each one timed to burn together. The fires lit up the Dayton sky like beacons of rage. Flames tore through product, cash, walls, and bodies. The screams inside were drowned by sirens and smoke. It wasn't just revenge. It was war. Linda wanted them to feel what she felt. Not fear, not loss, but absolute obliteration. By morning, the underworld of Dayton was shaken. People whispered her name like it was a ghost story. She burned them alive. She lost her sons. She's not done yet. But even as the fire smoldered, Linda knew she was out of time. The Kings would retaliate. The cops were circling. Her empire was crumbling fast. She had sacrificed everything to build it. And now, with nothing left to lose, Linda Reynolds was ready to burn it all to the ground. Because in her mind, justice hadn't been served, not yet. March 6, 2010, an anonymous call tipped off the Dayton Police Department. The voice on the line was shaky, almost afraid to speak. But the message was clear. She's responsible. She's dangerous. She's ready to go out in flames. They already knew about the fires. The city was still reeling. But this call? This connected it all. To Linda Reynolds. At sunrise, a convoy of officers descended on her home. Weapons drawn, vests on, ready for anything. But what they found was something they weren't prepared for. Linda was sitting quietly in her living room, pale, calm. Her eyes were bloodshot but dry. In front of her, on the coffee table, was the box. The same box, still sealed, still there. When they asked what it was, she said nothing, just slid it toward them with steady hands. Inside, the heads of Mike and Kyle. Cold, silent, their eyes still open. Even the most hardened officers couldn't hide their horror. The arrest was swift. Linda didn't resist, didn't cry. She simply stood, turned around, and offered her wrists. As they took her in, detectives began digging, and what they found was beyond anything they imagined. Phone records, handwritten ledgers, surveillance footage, names, dates, amounts, drop points, meticulously kept by a woman once seen as just a housewife. Linda Reynolds had built a criminal empire under everyone's nose. And now, that empire was burning. September 1st, 2010. The courtroom was packed. Reporters from across the state, cameras flashing, people lined up outside just to catch a glimpse of the woman they once waved to at the supermarket. Linda sat at the defense table, face expressionless, hands folded neatly in front of her. Not a single flinch as the prosecution began painting the picture. A grieving widow who turned into a criminal mastermind. A mother who led one of the largest drug operations in Dayton's history. Witness after witness took the stand. Former dealers, corrupt businessmen, even Officer Daniels, now disgraced, testified under pressure. They all told the same story. Linda was the boss. She gave the orders. She called the shots. But the most damning evidence wasn't testimony. It was her own handwriting. Dozens of notebooks hidden throughout her home. Every transaction, every bribe, every name, written in perfect, neat cursive, calculated, cold, controlled. Her defense argued that she had been forced into the trade, that she had no other way to care for her boys, that she did what any desperate mother might do. But the jury didn't see desperation. They saw strategy, ambition, ruthlessness. On December 15, 2010, the verdict came in. Guilty on all counts. And the sentence? Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Linda didn't cry until she heard her son's names read aloud one final time. Only then did her mask crack. The fallout was seismic. The city councilman resigned in disgrace. The businessman indicted on federal charges. Officer Daniels fired, stripped of his badge, and investigated for obstruction of justice. Dayton had been living in a lie. A smiling housewife had run its underworld, and the pillars that were supposed to protect the city had been part of her empire. Linda Reynolds now spends her days inside a cold gray cell. No windows, no visits, just time and memories. She doesn't talk much, but when she does, it's always about her sons. How Mike loved to play baseball. How Kyle wanted to be a firefighter. How she just wanted to keep them safe. But in trying to protect them, she exposed them to a world darker than she ever imagined. Some say she's a monster. Others the mother who snapped under the weight of grief, poverty, and desperation. The truth? It's not black and white. It never is. Linda Reynolds built an empire to survive. But it cost her everything. Her freedom, her name, and the only people she ever loved. Now, all that remains is a story. One that still haunts the quiet streets of Dayton. And one simple, chilling question. Was Linda a victim or a villain? You decide.